Niall, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I want to hand over directly to you now and ask you to take the podium as though you were here. So let's call it a virtual podium. And thank you very much again.
John, thank you very much, and greetings everyone from Islamabad, where I'm spending a couple of days. I will not delay the programme today because I actually have a hard stop at 2 o'clock your time. So, a country that does not exist, what does that mean? It means Somaliland. And I'm about to do a Chris Whitty impersonation for those of you who were familiar with the BBC during COVID lockdowns. Next slide, please. So, the Somaliland Security Programme is a programme that ran from December last year and will run until March next year. It's a UK government-funded programme, but unusually the sources of funding come from 3 different areas. One from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office itself, one from the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, and the final flow is from the Treasury. And the programme's delivered by Adam Smith International. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with loads of slides. I just want to go through 2 or 3 to tell you what we should be doing, and then I'll tell you what is actually happening and what happened. Next slide, please. So we have a theory of change with the overall impact being improved security for all. And in the context of that, we were looking at the idea that the police, the army, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Defence have improved their leadership and management approaches. And so that women and girls are verifiably encouraged, not just, yeah, we've done it, but verifiably encouraged to report sexual and gender-based violence incidents. We're also looking at how the Somaliland Parliament demonstrates an improved ability to scrutinise and influence the work of security institutions, to provide civilian oversight and to pass effective security legislation. And this is what I want to focus on when I come back. We're also looking at domestic terrorism and how prosecution and defence can be conducted in a manner that's human rights compliant. And then finally, looking at the area of community policing within the Somaliland police force. Next slide, please. So, the idea is, as you can see here, what's the impact we're looking for? Somaliland's security architecture is more effective and accountable in delivering Somaliland's national security priorities and supporting UK strategic interests. And most particularly, looking at the parliamentary aspect, which is the work that I lead. Next slide, please. So our outcome is that the Parliament has an improved ability to scrutinise the work of security institutions and provide civilian oversight. And we're looking at doing that by the provision of advisory support, mentoring, training, and limited material investment. You will notice that the FCDO focused on a specific named committee with an afterthought of other relevant committees in Parliament to scrutinise the work of the institutions and to support the passage of effective security legislation. Well, let's just clear the screen onto the next slide, please, and then we'll get to the meat of the problem. So, here is my dilemma. Somaliland is a country that is not recognised by any government anywhere in the world, not a single government. It was originally British Somaliland. Then when it gained its independence, it joined with Italian Somaliland, now Somalia. In 1991, after a military coup in which the Somalilanders were heavily persecuted, they declared their independence from Somalia. Somalia hasn't recognised that. No other country has either. The British government, however, have an office in Somaliland in the capital, Hargeisa. And that office is staffed by a very senior British diplomat who has the unofficial rank of ambassador, but the official title of head of the British office. The British government's official position is that they will recognise the independence of Somaliland when the government of Somalia recognises it. Not going to happen. So we have a first problem there. We have a donor working with a country where the country in question doesn't actually exist. Most Western countries recognise Somaliland as being the second most stable democracy in Africa. So a paradox there. This Somaliland security program was designed by what was then Her Majesty's government back at the beginning of 2021. In a classic piece of project design, no external advisors were consulted when it was designed. That might be fine, but there was then a considerable delay in the implementation, and it didn't go out to contract until September 2021, with the contract being awarded in late November 2021. So the difficulty with that was that there had been, particularly for my outcome, the parliamentary outcome, there had been a minor change in the landscape. And that minor change was that there'd actually been an election held on the 31st of May, in which of the 82 members of the lower house, the House of Representatives, 80 of the members lost their seats. So we were starting with a new House of Representatives, which had 80 brand new ministers, including a speaker who had never been a member of Parliament before. All of the committee chairs had never been members of Parliament before. And the only two existing members were relegated to the backbenches. They weren't given any control. So I arrived in December 2021, and I have a briefing by the British office. And I said to them, what are we doing about the fact that no one knows anything? And the response was, we don't understand. What do you mean? I said, well, I'm supposed to be doing security sector reform. This is a highly complex area for members of Parliament. These members of Parliament don't know what standing orders are. They don't know how they relate to the ministries. There's actually very little that they do know in terms of parliamentary process. And I was told, oh, well, we don't think that will be a problem. It's fine. Just go and see the Speaker, have a chat with the Speaker. It'll be okay. So I duly turned up at Parliament and asked if I could see the Speaker, and I was told that I could have an appointment the next day. Lovely. I turned up the next day and I'm ushered into the Speaker's office, and he says, Niall, it's lovely to see you, and thank you very much for coming to visit us. What exactly are you doing here? And I said, well, Mr. Speaker, I'm here to deliver the Somaliland Security Programme parliamentary component. Ah, that sounds interesting. What's that about? And it then transpired that it hadn't actually occurred to tell anyone on the from the donor side to tell either the Speaker or the President of Somaliland about this new programme that they'd started. And so we had some interesting conversations with the Speaker, and he explained to me that what I was offering was not in any way consistent with what he needed. And I agreed with him. And we then had a discussion about how, in order to do what the UK government wanted, we first of all had to put in basic building blocks so that MPs knew their role as MPs in plenary, in committees, etc. And I went back to the I went back to the British office and explained this and was told, well, you can do that as long as it doesn't cost us any more money and as long as you do it in your spare time outside the time allocated to achieve the results that we have in our framework. Thank you very much. That's very straightforward. So we eventually arranged a series of classic parliamentary fudges where, for example, I was told I could only train the members of staff, parliamentary staff being absolutely essential to the running of any parliament. Now, I could only train the parliamentary staff who worked for the Internal Affairs, Security and Defence Committee. And we thought about it for a while. And then with my national technical advisor, we realised that within the committee secretariat in Parliament, there were 25 staff, most of whom had been there for a while, so they had some experience. But they all covered each other's jobs when people went sick. So we decided that we would train all of those staff likely to support the Internal Affairs, Security and Defence Committee. We got to train all 20, and that was fine. Then I went to meet the chair of the committee. And the chair of the committee introduced me to his secretary with the slightly chilling words, but don't worry getting to know him because I'm replacing him next week. I could tell by the look on the secretary's face that this came as much as news to him as it did to me. And when we left the meeting, I asked my national advisor to find out what was going on. And the committee chair, bear in mind, brand new, never been an MP before, but had run a law firm for a number of years, had announced that he was bringing in his former executive assistant from his law firm to be the secretary to the committee. Well, the Secretary General of Parliament said no, and the chairman of the committee said yes. And in normal course of events, the Secretary General would have won. However, what you need to know is that the elected Speaker was not the government's choice, but he was elected with one defecting vote from the governing party. And yes, that defecting vote came from the chairman of the Internal Affairs, Security and Defence Committee. So when the Secretary General went to the Speaker and said, we can't do this, we've got a permanent parliamentary staff, we can't just bring in MP's own staff, the Speaker said, well, look, on this occasion we will do this, and this is okay. So we're having some difficulties there. I then said to the chairman of the committee, so how can we help? And he said, I've got a problem with the Minister of Defence. Well, so what's the problem? Well, I told him to come to the committee to give evidence, and he refused. Okay, well, there are mechanisms that we can use, and we can deal with that, I'm sure. And my national advisor was frantically trying to get me to pay attention to him and not to the chairman. And he said to me, it's not quite that simple. And what had happened was that the chairman had instructed the Minister of Defence to attend the committee meeting the next day. The Minister of Defence had not unreasonably said, I'm actually in Ethiopia at the moment. I'm afraid I won't be able to be there. So the chairman responded by sending another letter saying, that's fine, come in 3 weeks' time instead. And he had again, ironically, chosen a time when the Minister of Defence was already publicly scheduled to be elsewhere. And so the Speaker then wrote to the Minister of Defence and told him he was going to hold him in contempt of Parliament. And at that point, everyone just stopped talking to each other. So I suggested that we try and find a way of establishing liaison units in the relevant ministries so that staff could talk to staff and sort out all these problems. before they happened. And the Parliament thought this was a very good idea, but the ministers said, well, that's not a very good idea at all, because that means that our officials will be able to control our diaries. We don't want that to happen. Okay. So I said, well, look, why don't we have a conference? I'll find a really nice hotel, and there are some in Hargeisa. We'll give you a slap-up lunch. Why don't we all just, let's not have a workshop, let's not have a meeting, let's just all have lunch together and see if we can sort this out. And I was then told by the Minister of the Interior, dealing with the police, yeah, well, that's fine, but if you try and do that, I will declare it an illegal meeting and we'll close it down. I went, okay, but I'm actually just offering to give you some lunch. And he said, no, you can't do that. You need permission from the president. So we went to see the president, and the president said, no, I do think that's a really good idea. Go ahead with the meeting. So we turned up at the meeting, and everyone else came. No one turned up at all. They'd all said they'd come, and no one turned up, including the speaker. And at that point, I went back to each of them and said, look, what on earth is going on? And they essentially said, you're getting in the way of us sorting out our own problems. We're more than capable of coexisting. We've been doing this since 1991. We've had successive, effective changes of leadership at elections. We can do this. At which point I went back to the British office and said, are you sure you really want to waste money on something that the beneficiaries really don't want to do? And I was told, well, yes, absolutely, because we'd have to go back to ministers if we were deciding to change this. And we can't go back to ministers because we think that there might be a change of prime minister. And so I said, okay, so we're just going to continue. And they said, yes. And so we have a situation in Somaliland at the moment where we have a donor expending a not inconsiderable amount of money on a project in which they had not consulted with the beneficiaries before setting up the project, and where there had been minimal consultation since. And I have been told that the project will remain in play until the 31st of March next year, with the instruction that, as far as the Parliament is concerned, I should just do my best to spend the money. My counterpart, the Defence Advisor, has very recently been thrown out of the Chief of the Army Staff's office because he told him, you're not offering us what we want, and this won't work. The Chief of the Army Staff won't speak to the Minister of Defence because he says, I'm responsible to the Commander-in-Chief, who's the President. And the Constitution defines the police as being part of the armed services. And therefore, the Police Commissioner describes himself as being directly responsible to the President. And so he doesn't talk to the Minister of the Interior. So it is a little bit of an Alice in Wonderland world. And that, my friends, is sometimes what the donors are particularly good at setting up, although they always seem to be very careful to demand value for money as they do that. Now, I have wittered on for quite some time. I'm going to stop at this point and see if anyone wants to ask me any questions about Somaliland, the security sector program there, or the way forward.
No, thank you very much indeed. And I think in some ways what you have done is given a case study of some of the problems that Matt was talking about in terms of mediation and international work. So I want to turn initially to Matt and see if you have any comments that you want to make on the presentation from Matt.
Well, I mean, it was a fascinating case study, Niall. in fact, I've worked on Somalia and Somaliland previously. I'm very interested to hear from you whether you think, is this the latest in a succession of similar kinds of enterprises, or is this a one-off? I mean, and one of the points that came out of my research was the view that many international institutions do not learn from their own mistakes. What is your view? Do you think there will be any learning from this, or will it be buried?
I think there is a moderate degree of learning. I have seen at the end of August a significant sea change in the thinking of how the British office is viewing their work with the Parliament in the context of this programme. But I need to be very honest with you and say that I saw that sea change 24 hours after I resigned from the programme. And during which there was an attempt to persuade me that all I needed to do was trust them and it would be okay. But coming back to your first point, the British office has had a number of years, I think coming up on 7 years, of significant support to the Somaliland army in terms of improving it, professionalising it, running junior command and staff courses and a whole series of technical programs. Those have been really quite successful. But this new program, which was delayed for 18 months by COVID, is a sea change in the way that security sector reform is being approached out there. And my own view is that they are suffering from what FCDO in general has been suffering from for the last couple of years, which is the rapid cutback in ODA, which devastated a whole series of programs, and the lack of certainty about what is happening. If I look at actually another FCDO funded program that has me here in Islamabad at the moment, and John is familiar with it, he chairs the advisory board. I can tell you that we started off with a budget of 5.6 million over 3 years. In May 2021, we had that slashed by 70%, backdated to the 1st of April. And at the moment, I am now 3 months into the second quarter, 2 months into the second quarter of our financial year, and I do not yet have my budget for this year. And I have just been told to spend money as tightly as you can. So I think that the FCDO is not just about this. I think the FCDO is in a very difficult place at the moment. And they just, first of all, it was COVID, now it's Ukraine. I think they're all over the place.
Thanks very much, Niall. I know that you have to go very, very shortly indeed, but are there any other questions that anybody wants to put? Yasmin.
Just a quick one. I was curious, have you seen any vestiges of the kind of clan-based internal governance systems for kind of maintaining internal peace? Or is that gone with the former structures?
No. The upper house, which is based on the House of Elders, is representative of the clans, and we have seen both through the House of Elders and actually directly with the clans considerable engagement at the moment. There's currently a row going on. There should be a presidential election in November, but the president has sacked the election commission, and the new commission says that they genuinely cannot prepare the electoral roll in time. The president said he will stay on for another year. The opposition parties are refusing to accept that. And we are seeing the clan elders intervening fairly significantly to try and dampen this down. It's one of the areas where it is true that Somaliland is one of the more stable countries in the region.